I think we need to be around $100 a ton for carbon, because then a farmer making a transition in practices, they could be banking on an extra $200 to $400 per acre per year if they were moving from conventional or traditional practices to regenerative ones. That's the kind of money where you can say, yeah, I'd be willing to make a change for that.
That's Ben Dobson from Hudson Carbon. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today we're going to go deep into carbon with Ben Dobson. He's going to explain how carbon sequestration works and how farmers will get paid for the carbon they capture in their soil. And we're going to find out if hemp is really as good of a carbon sequesterer as everyone says it is. After we talk to Ben, we'll check in with Hempcrete builder Cameron McIntosh, who's going to share some exciting news about the Ereasy Spray-Applied Hempcrete System. I've also got a few nuggets of hemp news to share with you, but first, here's something to think about. If you're like me, you probably try to recycle as much of your household waste as possible. Maybe you've got a compost pile out back for your kitchen scraps. Maybe you've got curbside pickup for your glass, metal, cardboard, paper, and plastic. And we feel good about recycling. We're doing our part, right? Well, what if I told you that plastic recycling has essentially been a scam all along, foisted upon us by the big plastic companies, i.e. the oil companies? Thanks to some amazing investigative journalism at NPR and PBS, we've learned that big oil has misled the public into believing that plastic would be recycled. According to this story that was published on the podcast Planet Money, the plastic companies, the big oil companies, lobbied the government to require that all consumer plastic be stamped with that little recycling symbol, the little triangular arrows with the number in it. And they did this not because the plastic was ever going to get recycled. No, they did this because they wanted people like you and me, environmentally minded consumers, they wanted us to feel good about using plastic. Plastic was the environmentally friendly choice because look, it's going to be recycled. It's got that little symbol on it. And then we'd be okay with using more plastic. But all the while, these companies knew, like it's documented that they knew that recycling plastic was not economically viable and that this plastic was never, ever going to be recycled. All they wanted us to do was to buy more plastic. And we did, because we thought we were doing the right thing. And this has been going on for nearly 50 years. Like they knew about this a long time ago that plastic wasn't going to be recycled. And now they say that by 2050, there's going to be more plastic in our oceans than fish. It's just another example of us trading the long-term health of our planet for the short-term profits of shareholders. Makes my blood boil. I don't know about you, but just something to think about. And this segment, by the way, is brought to you by the folks at I&D Hemp in Montana. All right, let's get into some hemp news for this second week of February 2022. This came to me in an email and a press release from Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, a Democrat from Maine, who has introduced the Hemp Advancement Act of 2022, ostensibly to improve the 2018 Farm Bill's hemp provisions and provide greater clarity and flexibility to hemp growers and processors. She says that the 2018 Farm Bill laid a legal pathway for hemp production but created overly complicated regulations and hardship for farmers and small businesses in the process. She says she is introducing the Hemp Advancement Act of 2022 to eliminate unworkable testing requirements, set reasonable THC thresholds for producers and processors while protecting consumers, and end the discriminatory policy that bans people with drug convictions from growing legal hemp. I put a call into Congresswoman Pingree's office to see if we can get her on the podcast to hear more about that, so hopefully I'll have good news in that department sometime soon. There's a story on hempgrower.com about Pennsylvania, and it's a nice little synopsis of recent hemp history here in the state, including how involved our Department of Agriculture has been in building the hemp industry, not just for cannabinoids, but for the building industry. And it shines a little bit of light on the Project PA Hemp Home that listeners of this show have heard about before, as well as our friends over there at Coexist Build, Drew and Anna, who are doing some pretty cool things. Here's a story at hemptoday.net. It says, explosive demand for hurd in Europe is a bright signal for hemp building. The story goes on to say that a current supply crunch on hemp hurd in Europe, while a temporary inconvenience, signals a major shift forward for the hemp building sector and can advance the development of much needed processing facilities. This is something we have or should have been expecting for a while, as the potential for expansion in the construction sector was always on the cards, says veteran hemp builder Steve Allen, founder and director of the Ireland-based International Hemp Building Association. He goes on to say that for the longer term, this is good news, as it justifies establishing hemp processing facilities in many regions where there is currently interest in doing so. Steve Allen is an absolute pioneer in the hemp building space, and you might be interested in my conversation with him from Season 1, Episode 62 from December 2019. Here's a story from Hemp Industry Daily. It says that hemp was lauded as a climate-smart commodity for its use as a construction material by U.S. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack as he highlighted new funding opportunities for farmers. So he was speaking at a university in Missouri this past week, and he pointed to hemp when he announced that the U.S. Department of Agriculture will invest $1 billion in climate-smart commodities. And here, in this clip of Vilsack giving his speech, you're going to hear some things that we've been talking about on this show for a long time.
With this opportunity, we now have a chance to change it from an extraction effort to a circular effort. The ability to essentially create climate-smart commodities, the opportunity to convert waste into a wide variety of bio-based materials. I saw some of them today. Hemp in construction material, for example. Those processing facilities can be located right where the crops are being grown. They can be sustainably produced. They can be a higher value. They can create jobs in rural communities. They can increase farm income. They can expand population centers in rural places, taking pressure off our urban centers. They can restore life and vitality in our small towns. That's the opportunity side of this.
Yeah, he's right. There's a lot of opportunity here. This next story is from the other side of the world in New Zealand. Hello there, Kiwi people. The story is on hempgrower.com, and it says that $1.3 million was awarded to a New Zealand company for hemp fiber research. It says that New Zealand Natural Fibers will use the money to study and develop hemp fibers for various products. The company also plans to add $2 million in cash in addition to the grant to advance its research efforts even further and create products like activewear, flooring, and food packaging made from hemp. So, I've never interviewed anyone in the New Zealand hemp industry, but I think it might be time to. I don't know, maybe I should take a trip to New Zealand. Actually, that's a bad idea, because I think if I ever go to New Zealand, I'm never coming home. Anyway, one more little nugget here, and this is not so much news, but something fun. It's a recipe. It's from eatingwell.com, and it's peanut butter and hemp banana. I never really thought about this, but hemp hearts add texture and nuttiness to this easy 3-ingredient snack. Either creamy or crunchy peanut butter works well here. Basically, you put some peanut butter on a banana, and then you dip it in hemp hearts. And there you go. You got all that nutrition and fiber and all the good stuff. I will have a link to all of these stories on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com, as well as a link to that NPR PBS story about recycling that we heard about earlier. All right, are you ready to get into this conversation about carbon? I know I am. Here we go. Ben Dobson from Hudson Hemp and Hudson Carbon. Welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today?
Eric Herlock, it's great to be on with you today. Thank you. I'm doing very well. We have an ice storm out here. but we're really ready to talk with you today about our work with carbon, hemp, and ecosystem services on farms.
So I wonder first if you can just give us a general introduction to yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. My name is Ben Dobson. I was born on a small organic farm, and I've, over the course of my professional career, worked on many farms in many settings. And over the last 8 or 9 years, really focusing on scalable regenerative organic agriculture on a pretty large grain farm that we converted from conventional to regenerative organic practices. We've incorporated hemp, and really at the beginning of our process started measuring and understanding what was happening in our soils. Particularly, the word organic refers to carbon. So I don't necessarily look at organic as the USDA certification with a list of things you can and can't do. I look at it as building organic matter in the soil so that we don't need those extra inputs and chemicals.
Okay.
And not being too dogmatic about that. That's our focus. And we started Hudson Carbon to study the changes in our soil organic matter, carbon, and health as we changed our farming practices.
So can you give us sort of a basic definition, in your view, of regenerative agriculture?
So regenerative agriculture, to me, defines a type of agriculture that regenerates and revives the cycles that occur on land. So we have several dominant cycles that really make life on this planet possible. And as farmers, we're responsible now collectively for 60% of the Earth's surface and how it's treated. So we're actually managing the membrane between the air above us and the soil below us. So regenerative agriculture is agriculture that rebuilds the life system on the soil, on top of it, in the plants, and underneath, so that we're properly cycling carbon, nutrients, and water, and also so that we're not harming biodiversity with over usage of chemicals. I know some of us need to use chemicals sometimes, but we're really managing and stewarding over half the Earth's surface. We need to regenerate this Earth's surface into a healthy ecosystem in order to assure a future for our children and mitigate the worst effects of climate change. So regenerative agriculture is a healthy management of the land that we farm to optimize the carbon cycle, biodiversity, the nutrient cycle, and water holding capacity. And the outcome of this is healthy food for healthy people.
There you go. That reminds me of the J.I. Rodale quote, healthy soils equals healthy food equals healthy people.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I imagine you're optimistic about this. Like, we can do this, right? Because otherwise maybe you wouldn't be in the line of work you're in.
Yeah, you've got to find something to be optimistic about. My wife's actually from Haiti, where soil degradation and destruction of the land has driven what's now an untenable social crisis. So on the other side, when I see solutions, even glimmers of hope there, but really here in the States, we have a lot of problems, and we also have a lot of opportunities. And we have farmers across our landscape who have shown time and again that they're ready to respond to the best of opportunities when they're given them. And I think hemp's been one of those examples. So I have a lot of hope because, I have a lot of kids. We need to be hopeful. What we found is we really feel there are real solutions that are community-based and local, but could add up to a global one.
You talked about the membrane between the atmosphere and the soil. Can you sort of explain how carbon sequestration works?
Absolutely. So when we talk about carbon, it's become pretty confusing because if you just look on TV, all you do is associate carbon with your car or your electricity. But really, when this planet started, we were 95% carbon dioxide. There was almost no oxygen, and there was nothing alive. And the first organisms that lived on this planet were photosynthetic ones, meaning they would use sunlight and they would breathe in carbon dioxide, and they would hold that carbon in their own bodies or excrete it out and then release oxygen back into the atmosphere. This process started about 3.8 billion years ago. And it took all 3.8 billion of those years to go from 95% carbon dioxide in the atmosphere down to just 280 parts per million a couple hundred years ago. Now we're, working that back up. We're up to 420 parts per million. But the reason that happened was photosynthesis. And it really kickstarted when we started getting large plants, not just photosynthesis is carried out by phytoplankton in the ocean and microorganisms, but also mainly by plants. The plants draw nutrients from their roots, mainly magnesium, and then they provide and water. And then they open their leaf stomata and breathe in carbon dioxide. And then they receive energy from the sunlight in their chloroplasts. And then they combine all of these inputs to break the carbon, to breathe in carbon dioxide, release the oxygen back out, and then the plant converts that carbon into a form of sugars. And that then is what builds it's the building block of the plant. But like any transfer of energy, the excess carbons go out the roots of the plant as sugars and feed the microbes in the soil. And those microbes then feed the plants their nutrients and help transfer water. So this is the life cycle, photosynthesis. And this is also why we have oil and natural gas. What we're doing there is we're just pumping up the results of photosynthesis from millions of years ago. But all of it depends on sunlight as our energy, and plants are what have transferred that energy for so long to make this planet livable. So what we've done is in 200 short years, we've kind of messed with that whole cycle. And we've really thrown off the balance of the planet's lungs that then drive our ability to be here. So the good news is we now know there are a lot of solutions, but we just really need to implement them at scale. And we need to make it financially possible. There aren't farmers out there who don't want to take care of their land. I haven't really met anyone who says, yeah, I just want that soil to wash away. Or it's about how do we really get what we need to take care of it? Mm-hmm. And that's really where we've landed today is we need to maximize photosynthesis, and we need to develop tools so that all farmers can have the economics to do it.
Now, is that like a carbon market or carbon credits? Like how would that new system work?
I'd say that carbon credits and carbon market are important opportunity and could be a real big aspect of this. Especially if it's a robust market that actually looks at the whole supply chain that a farmer's part of. And then if the market's designed to the carbon cycle. Again, if we should think of this as assets and liabilities. Excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is proving it's a liability. But us farmers, we know that extra carbon in our soil is an asset. So in a market, you need a real buyer and a real seller. So a buyer who has to pay for carbon is someone who's turning good carbon into a liability as carbon dioxide. And a seller is someone who's taken that carbon dioxide, managing their surface so that it converts it into carbon using plants and trees and natural practices. I think there's tremendous potential here. I would go a bit further and say that really us farmers and anyone who owns land with forest or wetlands, we're stewards whether we want to be or not. And when I say or not, it's because there's nothing that gives us value. We don't get to add their ecological value of our land or what the services it provides on our balance sheet. So really, I'm a big proponent of what we call developing ecological assets, where a carbon baseline, an understanding of the water flow of a farm, your biodiversity, develops a baseline value. And I'm working with a few pretty big groups in finance to think this through, so that you actually have sort of an asset base for your farm based on its current ecology. And then you apply for carbon credits, and they're like a dividend. They're very important, but we actually need to add even more value to farms for what they already have. In terms of carbon in their soil, of course, or carbon in the trees, but also really the whole ecological function of the place. It's a sort of an advanced concept, but I just think carbon credits are important, but we need to go further so that we really build a good market where carbon's priced properly, but also that we value those other things that a farm does that are related to carbon, building water holding capacity, not releasing nutrients into adjacent streams and waterways, and building the biodiversity of our farms. So we really think that farms should be able to add we want to help farms and working with financial system to determine a ecological asset class that can help from not only that you can build dividends with carbon credits, collect money each year, but we also really want to see the assets of the ecology of a place valued on the balance sheet. I hope that's a helpful answer, but we'll dig in a bit more on carbon and carbon markets, because it's really, to me, the first step we can move with.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, my question is like, how do you measure how much carbon, farms are sequestering in their soil and their crops?
So that's what our focus has been at Hudson Carbon is, soil sampling is expensive and the laboratory work's expensive, and there are several models. So there are two different approaches right now that are being taken in carbon markets. One is direct measurement of the soil on the farm, where you do you measure several points on the farm and get a baseline from those different points. And then you develop how much carbon's in the soil on the farm. And then you come back, to 1, 3, 5, 7 years later, and you measure again. And you change that change in carbon in the soil. If you've registered at the beginning of that baseline process, you register with the carbon registry. When you remeasure later on, that change in carbon, if it's gone up, gets registered as carbon credits, and you sell those. Carbon credits are sold as a 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. Is what a carbon credit is valued on. But for every 1 ton of real soil carbon that you add to your soil, you've actually removed 3.67 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So what we do is we measure the soil. I'll give an example. There's a 100-acre farm, and the average organic matter was 3.8% when we measured. 5 years later, we come back and it's up to 4.2%. That 0.4%, that correlates to several tons of carbon per acre. And then you multiply those tons of soil carbon times 3.67, and that gives you the calculation of how much carbon dioxide you brought in over those years. Okay. And then you can be issued those carbon credits. I know that's a little complex, but basically we measure the change in soil carbon, and we calculate how many tons of CO2 came in through the plants into the soil to turn into that much soil carbon. And then we're able to work with registries to sell those credits. The other method is to use what are called process-based models. And there are 2 dominant models out there. One's called the USDA Comet Planner, and the other is the DNDC model, the denitrification decomposition model. These are models where you enter your farming practices and rotations, and the models project what your carbon sequestration was. We found that the results from that aren't as consistent as direct soil carbon measurement. And our own focus at Hudson Carbon is really exploring this interface. So we're working on a technological and ground truthing based approach to selecting where we test for soil carbon on a farm, so that we don't pull too many cores, so we can do it affordably, but that we test in the right places. Okay. We also are, we think the DNDC folks are doing a good job, and that their model is getting better and better, thanks to more and more ground truthing research being done. So there's ground truth models, they're process-based models and direct measurement of soil to calculate the change in carbon. We focus more on direct measurement.
So this is not like a widespread practice yet. Like farmers are not making money from carbon sequestration.
The primary problem is the price of carbon's too low. So for example, in the European Union, the carbon on the cap and trade market is trading at over 80 euros per ton of carbon dioxide. To give you some perspective, and they're not yet, they're in the process of moving towards working with natural carbon solutions, meaning they would pay for carbon sequestered into lands. They're not yet, but they're studying how. In the United States, our carbon markets are mostly voluntary, and the prices are very low. I dare say the prices are like greenwashing prices. You can be a big polluter, kind of offset your emissions at a real low price, but it's not a big enough price to drive real change for us farmers on the land. There are beginning to be some buyers willing to pay more because they're genuine. And I think those are the buyers who know that they're in the process of changing their supply chains. And they also know that the people buying their products really expect them to actually address their carbon issue. Yeah. So it's not really happening at scale, and it's really a price issue. To shed some light on I think we need to be around $100 a ton for carbon, because then a farmer making a transition in practices, they could be banking on an extra $200 to $400 per acre per year if they were moving from conventional or traditional practices to regenerative ones. That's the kind of money where you can say, yeah, I'd be willing to make a change for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
But we're not there yet. And our real goal is with Hudson Carbon and many of our collaborators is, as a group, to see a higher price in carbon and better scientific approaches to measuring it, so that we can make a user-friendly system for farmers and landowners to move towards, carbon sequestration, regenerative agriculture, and managing their ecosystems. You don't even have to agree with it philosophically completely, but we think that economics are the answer. We really need to bring revenue to farmers. And unfortunately, our American carbon markets, they're there, but the prices aren't high enough. The other good news is the prices are rising. They almost doubled over the last 2 years. So towards the $20 to $25 a ton mark. I dare say, I think we're headed towards 50 in the next 2 to 3 years. So we're approaching, and that's going to start getting interesting for a lot of farmers out there. And I think in 10 years, there'll probably be a price that's interesting to most farmers. I think we're headed in the right direction.
I hear, people sort of talk down on the whole carbon market thing. What are some of the arguments against the carbon markets?
So I think some of the key arguments against it are that, the big argument is that if polluters are getting off the hook so they can keep polluting, does this really solve the problem? So net zero is an interesting thing. You've really got to think about it. If we're not going to get to net zero for 40 years, and we already have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we're still going to be in even more trouble in 40 years than we are today.
Right.
So what we actually have to figure out how to achieve as a global civilization, and then all the way down to community by community, is how do we get our carbon in the atmosphere back into balance? Most scientists agree we want it around 350 parts per million, but we know that before the Industrial Revolution, we were at 280 parts per million. And today we're sitting at 420 parts per million. And it's only taken 30 years for us to go from 350 parts per million to 420. So we're accelerating.
Yeah. And in that time, we knew about the issue, right? It's not like it was a surprise.
The first carbon credits to farmers were going out in the 90s, but unfortunately the system fell apart. I would say the last time we had great action, we had EPA Administrator Bill Riley back in the late 80s, early 90s. We built a successful sulfur dioxide market and got rid of the problem. It worked.
Yeah.
We know we can do this. We just need the will to do it. So right now, these voluntary carbon markets, they kind of let polluters off the hook. Really, big polluters, point source polluters like oil wells, coal, all that. Mm-hmm. We need to deal with what they're emitting now, but we also need to deal with what was emitted in the last 30, 40 years. So markets aren't really the problem with carbon markets is there are none of them other than the EU market that are designed to a specific outcome. And we need to design the markets with an outcome and identify who are the appropriate buyers, who are the appropriate sellers as per the carbon cycle, not political decisions. Yeah. It's not a political decision. That's a carbon cycle decision. And then what are the goals we need to achieve? How do we want the atmosphere to read when we measure it? And then from there, we could come up with an effective program. And I think in a nutshell that all the types of criticisms you hear about carbon markets, I think most of them would go away if we made those fundamental changes, because then you could point to people what we're actually doing here.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating because it's it's a political issue. Like, it shouldn't be a political issue, but from what you're saying, it's like it's going to become an economic issue, or it should be. So like people are going to make money, they're going to change.
Yeah. We're in a situation where one side, I'm involved in a group that involves bipartisan thinking about pricing carbon. It's sad to say, but I'll admit that neither group or neither side is really thinking of the carbon cycle when they're doing this. They're thinking about the money from the carbon credits and what they want to do with it. So, one group says, well, that's how we should build our infrastructure. And the other group says, well, that's how we should pay for schools, or we should give all that money to people. And it's like, well, actually, we should, we need to manage this money to the carbon cycle, because one side of the carbon cycle lets it out as carbon dioxide, and the other side of the cycle brings it back in as carbon. And from there, we could identify the appropriate buyers and sellers. And the higher the price on the wrong side of the carbon cycle, and the better the return for the right side of the carbon cycle, we could actually solve a problem here.
Well, that's good to hear. So let's talk about hemp. Everyone touts hemp as this amazing tool for carbon sequestration. How much carbon can hemp take out of the atmosphere?
So actually a lot, and it really depends on how you use the hemp. So if you grow hemp properly, or I shouldn't say properly, that's unfair to the many different ways it's grown. But if there are many ways to grow hemp that can build carbon in your soil. So that's, you're building your resource, you're adding carbon to your soil. The other thing, though, is that hemp sequesters a hell of a lot of a carbon in about 100 days, 120 days into its stalks. So the real question is, what are you using the hemp for? If your hemp is going into hempcrete, you're tying up all the carbon that's in that hemp in concrete, literally, in building material.
Sure.
If that hemp is going into a composite board, same thing, you're tying it up for a while. If it's going into CBD, it's kind of going up in smoke, or, or into a tincture, you're probably not helping too much. If you're making biochar out of the hemp, that's sequestered for a long time. 1 acre of hemp can bring in up to 3 tons of carbon on a really healthy acre. But most of them, around 1 ton of carbon, some of them 2 tons of carbon is stored in the stock in 1 acre of really good hemp stalks. Multiply that times 3.67. Means in 1 year, an acre of hemp just in the stalks can sequester between 3.5 and 7 tons of carbon dioxide per year. And then here's the other thing we got to think about. We have to think about what that hemp's replacing. Concrete causes a ton of carbon emissions. And if instead of causing those emissions, you're actually driving sequestration, you've solved a problem and added a solution. So you're kind of having a double down effect. Mm-hmm. So this is that, and same thing with hemp composite building materials replacing lumber. Instead of cutting down a tree that would be, sequestering carbon, let's use paper too, cutting down trees to make paper.
Right.
What if we could leave those forests and let them grow to full maturity and sequester carbon while we use hemp to make paper instead? Or let's look at cotton. Cotton uses a ton of water and a lot of chemicals and causes a lot of issues. What if we could replace that with hemp and solve some of those issues? So hemp not only directly helps solve a problem, but indirectly, it replaces dirty, harmful supply chains. So it has this, what I call, and then if you're growing it well and it's adding carbon to your soil, it's a trifecta.
Yeah.
So that's really how hemp plays into this. And there's a huge amount of hope that I and many others share around hemp and its potential.
Yeah, I share that hope with you. And how do we get there? I know it's, one day at a time, but it seems like we're still up against like the marijuana stigma. We're up against the oil companies. It's like so many factors.
I think, yeah, I would say we get there. We're up against the same thing. So the very industries I just talked about, back when hemp was made illegal, the Chicago Tribune was actually printed on hemp paper, is my understanding.
Oh.
William Randolph Hearst San Francisco Chronicle was on wood pulp paper. William Randolph Hearst really was one of the drivers against hemp and cannabis.
Yeah.
Whether that's a direct coincidence that there's that connection or not, it's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
Henry Ford built a composite car that ran on cellulosic hemp ethanol in 1939, 41. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have the stigmas. We also have several entrenched interests. Petroleum-based plastics, the cotton industry, the wood pulp industry, the concrete industry. Fortunately, I'm seeing a lot in the concrete industry interested in adding hemp because they see a win-win for themselves.
Yeah.
I think that their conversation's multifaceted. Some of those in those industries are open to shifting and some aren't. But what we're really missing is infrastructure to process hemp into the industrial and outputs we need. It's sort of a chicken, egg, and hen house issue. We need to build the hen house, we need to buy the hens, and we need to wait for them to start making eggs. So not only do we have to build the infrastructure, but then also farmers need to be guaranteed, return for their crop as this industry is starting. I think the best example in the country of this actually happening is Ken Elliott with IND Hemp. Ken's built some really good hemp facilities. He's putting his money where his mouth is, and he's been buying hemp from farmers 2 years in a row. He's got a really good hemp seed food enterprise off the ground, and now he's launching a hemp fiber and hurd manufacturing facility. But he's doing exactly that. He's built the infrastructure, he's paying the farmers, and he's building the market. And he's taking a lot of risk, but he's really excited. And he's doing it the right way.
Yeah.
That's an example of what we need. And then it's contingent upon people like myself and all the others working on these similar issues to me to help build a price in to pay the farmers and that supply chain for the positive, beneficial impact it has on the carbon cycle, so that we add another revenue stream beyond. Farmers should be getting paid not just for what they grow, but how they grow it.
Sure.
And then we can start moving towards, really showing, well, it's a lot more valuable to grow hemp than corn or soybeans. That's a reality we need to move towards.
So first, full disclosure, Ken Elliott and IND Hemp, they are sponsors of this very podcast. So just putting that out there.
Oh, I didn't know that, but I'm glad to hear. Great to hear. And I would add, there's some others, some very good, Rodale Institute's working on hemp. They're really interesting concrete group out of New Jersey is working on incorporating hemp fiber into their 3D printing concrete.
Yeah. Was that Black Buffalo?
That's Black Buffalo. And that has some potential at scale. And my great friend Cameron McIntosh, I think he did something like 15 or 20 hemp houses this year.
He's a very busy man.
He's really showing that hempcrete or hemp plaster, is really a viable building material. Yeah. And now a lot more people are jumping into that. So I think we're at the beginning of this, and all of those folks I just mentioned, we're all in touch one way or the other. And the network's getting bigger. And in a way, I've been part of the CBD and cannabinoid. I'm a fan of the cannabis plant. I think all aspects of it are valuable. But now that CBD is sort of settled into a more stable marketplace, it's not the gold rush we all thought it was. It's opened the door back up, I think, for industrial hemp to really have its rightful place in the conversation, and for us to all really focus on it.
Absolutely. Cameron's company, Americhanvre Hemp, also a sponsor of our show. Full disclosure to our audience.
I would also say to the audience, the sponsors of this show are all, hemp is interesting to all of us. And there aren't that many people doing it and making it work industrial yet. So right. I think it's very important that we do understand who these people are, learn from them, and spread the word.
That's what I'm doing here, getting the stories from the people who are making this industry happen. And because I believe in hemp, and I believe that I'm an optimist like you. I think we can figure this out. All right, so I have like a hypothetical scenario that I want to throw at you. All right, so bear in mind, I'm sort of naive, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a farmer, but let's say if you were to remove like all barriers around, if you could plant hemp at such a huge scale, like every available farmable tract of land, if that was planted in hemp, removing all political barriers and constraints of private property, and we just like went all in on hemp, Could we make a difference? Like you mentioned, like the lungs of the world. Could we recreate that sort of thing? Like I hear when you talk about the lungs of the world, they usually talk about the Amazon rainforest. Could we do that through agriculture on a huge scale? Like picture the United States, picture like the Louisiana Purchase. If that was just all planted in giant stands of hemp, could we move the needle like more quickly?
I think we could. We wouldn't do hemp every year in a row, but making it part of a 3 to 4 year rotation where every third year we need a new staple in American agriculture. Right now, our staples are corn, soy, and wheat. And then behind that, there's secondary staples of other small grains and cotton. So, but basically, the meat we eat, the food we eat is some constitution or reconstitution of soy and corn. We're not the healthiest anymore. I grow corn and soy too. I run a feed mill
Yeah.
or have run a feed mill. But my point is, we all know the value of our corn and soy would go up too if we had a third staple crop. And I think hemp is just that. If we could be approaching, and my dream is to see 30 to 80 million acres of hemp in the US. And some of our, I would argue we have some uses of our corn and soybeans. A lot of our soybeans aren't eaten by animals in the United States. And a lot of our corn isn't even eaten by animals. It's used by ethanol.
Sure.
So I think we have a lot of space to add another crop that will add value to our corn and soy, but also add some major lungs to our landscape. Mm-hmm. Roughly speaking, if this country did 50 million acres of hemp, we would be sequestering a couple 100 million tons of carbon per year.
Wow.
On that acreage. And that's a huge opportunity. But it's also one of many solutions. We have hemp to me is one of 5 to 10 super crops. Bamboo is another. Appropriately used sugarcane is another. Kanaf. So we need to think of these super crops in desert systems. Agave is actually a super crop we're working with in Mexico and U.S. Southwest. But hemp is one of those top 5 key super crops that are part of a major solution for our future. Okay. And it's not anti-capitalist. It's a great way. This plugs into industrial supply chains. It plugs into markets. And we just need to figure out the economics so that it adds more to a farmer's bottom line than the other alternatives.
Right. And as we move into that and, we are putting more carbon in the soil and, feeding the microbiome there, would you see an effect in like the nutrient density of the food that we're growing?
I think it really depends on the practices being used to grow the hemp. But I think overall, what hemp does is a great nutrient scavenger. But like any crop, if you're removing all the hemp biomass, you're removing some nutrient with it. So it does a great job of going deep in the soil, pulling nutrients up. We've noticed it really improves our soil biology and also our water infiltration and our soil carbon. So it really increases the capacity of the soil to cycle water and nutrients and carbon, but it also does remove good amounts of potash. And, we reproduce our nitrogen with leguminous cover crops and some animal manures. Mm-hmm. So we don't worry about nitrogen so much, but from a potassium and trace element approach, the hemp can pull some. But if you're managing the right rotation that's re-releasing and cycling nutrients, we don't have to add a ton. But it is working towards that solution. I'd also like to say the most overlooked part of hemp that we should really be thinking about is how healthy it is to eat.
Mm-hmm. It's a superfood, yeah.
Hemp seeds are a superfood, and that's where the nutrient density comes in. Because hemp is so good at pulling nutrients from the soil, it produces a nutrient-dense superfood in its seed. That has all the major components of the protein we need. It just doesn't have the lysine we need. So that's it's everything but that. So it has tons of mineral nutrients, very healthy omega-3 fats. So that's an indication of just how well this plant concentrates nutrients into its seed.
Can you offer any advice to farmers who are, curious about learning more about carbon markets or carbon sequestration or thinking about moving into regenerative agriculture?
Absolutely. On carbon markets, full disclosure, I do work some with B Carbon, but of all the carbon registries, I really think they've taken a terrific farmer and landowner friendly approach. They also work in the background with a lot of scientific rigor, but they're out of Texas, and they really focus on what are the issues facing landowners and how do we bring carbon value to them. I think their website really puts these issues into clear terms.
Okay.
For regenerative agriculture, I love the work of many, but I point people towards the Savanna Institute, the Savory Institute, the No-Till on the Plains Conference, the No-Till Farmer Magazine. They promote some inputs that I don't promote some inputs that I don't love. They actually, I think, are helping farmers move away from inputs. And then also the Rodale Institute. These are all research institutes with a lot of resources on their websites that you can tap into and look at. And as far as hemp goes, it's really, there aren't enough online resources yet, but Rodale's beginning to build some. I think I encourage people to follow a lot of the developments that I think will be coming out of Pennsylvania and Montana around hemp. And there's been some good work going on in Colorado on industrial hemp as well, if you look into some university research. Mm-hmm. And then also Cornell in New York State has done a ton of hemp breeding and work. But candidly, we need more resources on hemp. So I'd say, go to Cornell, go to Rodale. University of Colorado Boulder's done some things. They all have some good research to point to on hemp.
Okay, thank you for those. It was actually at the Rodale Institute in the summer of 2017 that I saw my first stand of hemp. That was quite a life-changing moment for me.
Terrific. Yeah, they've done a really nice job spreading the word on it and continue to be innovative of how to use it. I think most recently they have a greens initiative as hemp is a salad green. That's been really interesting.
All right. Well, Ben Dobson, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Eric, it's a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate you, the Lancaster farmer, and your whole community of readers and supporters. So thank you.
If you want to learn more about Hudson Carbon and Hudson Hemp, check out the links on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com. All right, now we're going to change gears a little bit, and we're going to get into hemp building. We're going to talk to Cameron McIntosh from Americhanvre Hemp, and he's also the Director at Large for the U.S. Hemp Building Association. Cameron McIntosh, welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, brother. Thanks for having me back, Eric.
Yeah, anytime. So I guess first, full disclosure, your company, Americhanvre Hemp, is one of our sponsors for this year. So we'll hear from you periodically because of that. But even if you weren't a sponsor, I love following your career because you are just getting shit done. Can I say that? Yeah.
I think so.
You're just getting it done here in the hemp space, in the hemp building space. And so I'm just thankful I know you, and your story is inspiring. So happy to share it with the other people.
Well, likewise, Ben. We really appreciate it. And our second year sponsoring you with a modest amount is just a token of how much we appreciate you and what you're doing with the podcast and the newspaper and how important it is to have a sort of an unbiased presentation of what's going on here in the industry. So we really appreciate that and continue to support you as best we can.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Every little bit helps. So anyway, you're on the show today because you have some big news to share with the world, right? Can you tell me what's going on?
Big news for a little industry. Yep. So we are about a day or so away here from announcing the release of the Americanized version of the Ereasy Spray-Applied Hempcrete System. So essentially part of our licensing agreement with Damien Baumer of Ereasy in France is that we were given permission to find a contract fabrication partner to create the hardware and the other components for the Ereasy system here in the United States, as opposed to having to import them, which, as everybody knows right now, has gotten continuously more painful. And I don't see that getting better. Why would the shipping companies give us a discount on the wonderfully high prices that they've achieved in the last year? And it's important to us. So we chose to partner with EZG Manufacturing out in Ohio. They are the producer of the masonry mortar mixer that we use for the system. It's a really well-made piece of equipment, and they're a good, American company doing good things for the masonry industry and keen to get into some of these, alternative building methods. So basically, EZG is going to be producing the hopper or the tank, which you've seen, Eric, is the part of the machine that the hempcrete, once it's mixed, is introduced into. It has a pair of screws in it that introduce it to the air lines and all of that. So basically, we made some changes. Screws? That's right. Yeah, they run opposing each other. Yep. So I didn't know if that was too technical of a term here.
I think anytime you can say Archimedes on the podcast, the better.
We got to drop it. That's right. So basically, there were a few things that we changed. None of them are systemic. The equipment still operates in the way that it was intended to, but we did make some changes that make it a little bit easier for the operator both to use and then also to repair here in the United States. Okay. So the version that I have, for example, has a European 220 volt motor on it, an electric motor. So that means that we have an extra piece of equipment on site, which is an inverter box that takes the power from 220 down to 110. So that's a huge help. That alone is a major change for the Americanized version, and then a few other things that are just aimed at beefing it up and making it a little bit more user friendly. So it's really exciting, man. It's been a kind of a long road here over the last few months since at the end of our season. We had a pretty good season. All things considered for the size of the industry.
Well, yeah, talk about that. How you built quite a few hemp homes last year, right?
Well, built, no, insulated, yes.
Oh, okay.
So we did it. No, it's all good. I like to make that distinction because it certainly wasn't all, on my shoulders. I'm essentially, we did a good job of setting ourselves up as an insulation subcontractor. So a lot of the work that we got this year were for projects that were already in process and or being built by a GC or a motivated homeowner or something like that who found out that we had this equipment. They were already interested in moving along in the direction of doing hempcrete. But when they found out that we had, a spray applied system that could be deployed, relatively simply on the East Coast, sure. That's sort of how we got, the work that we got. So we did about 8 or 10 projects, about eight residential homes between them from Virginia all the way up to Massachusetts. A couple of them with our colleagues at Hempstone up there in Massachusetts, really wonderful outfit up there, who we've been sort of, working alongside. But basically, we showed up to a house that had been framed, services run, electrical and plumbing, things like that in. And then we would I would show up with the equipment on my trailer and my truck. And then they would provide me with the other 3 laborers, because apart from the actual spraying, which is operator experience heavy, the other 3 jobs that it takes to run this piece of equipment are, you need to work hard, but you don't have to have any skill or experience doing it ahead of time. So we just needed, strong backs basically for the other 3 positions. And a lot of that comes down to the way that we set the system up and using this EZG mixer, that mud hog, the big hydraulic mixer that we have, which is able to do an entire batch at one time. You can take some of the rebound that's coming back from the spray section, mix that back in, but beyond that, our materials are a 1-to-1 ratio. So we've got 1 bag of hurd, 1 bag of binder, and then that mixer also has a water distribution bar with a water meter on it.
Okay.
So we're very accurate and precise in terms of how we're mixing the material. So again, the success from this year was really the fact that we put this system together to be easily transported, right? So we could get it to a job site, relatively easy to use, other than the spraying part, which obviously required my experience. But really anybody that I put on this system, I must have trained about 50 different people throughout the course of the year on these different job sites, on all the jobs, mixing, raking, collecting the material. So it's very, user friendly when you pair it with the EZG mixer, which is what sort of led to our partnership with them for making the equipment.
Okay.
Because we'd really like to encourage people, although it's not necessary. This is one of the great things about the Ereasy system, is that it's relatively affordable compared to other systems, in that the hopper box, the vacuum lines, the air line, all of those things are required for spraying, but you don't have to own a mixer. You can rent one of those. You don't have to own an air compressor. You can rent one of those too, and just build it right into the cost of your jobs, which we actually had to do on a couple jobs here. So,
okay.
So yeah, it's relatively affordable in the grand scheme of things in terms of, hempcrete spray application equipment.
Right.
We're talking about maybe a quarter of the cost of the next most comparable piece of equipment.
Wow.
For just the base package of what you need. So that's why we're really excited to be able to have Americanized this, and not for any other reason other than that it's expensive to import. We believe obviously in getting things locally if possible, or at least domestically going forward.
Let me ask you this. At what point will you be sourcing your hurd domestically?
That's a great question, man. We're working on that. We have talked to pretty much everybody that is getting close. And I say that lovingly because I think that people are getting close, and that we will very soon, hopefully within the next year, have a supply for the Ereasy system in particular, though. And I do catch shit for this, but we import the hurd from France for a couple of reasons. Number one is the quality and the consistency. So we can get a container of the same quality. It's replicable, reliable. It shows up in the same format. We know what we're getting.
Sure.
And for the Ereasy system in particular, excess dust and fiber, for example, in your hurd, create deposits throughout the system that you then have to compete with and clean out. Okay. So it's really important. It's more important for me to have a very clean, high grade, building grade product as a spray application tech than it would be for someone doing cast in place. You can get away with it with cast in place. It's still not ideal. Too much dust is the kiss of death for a hempcrete wall. The only times I've heard of a hempcrete wall falling apart was when there was too much dust. So it is critical.
Okay.
Part of our success has been derived from the fact that the French hurd is certified as building quality by a third-party professional body in France.
Okay.
And that is critical. It has helped me greatly when I'm having conversations with code enforcement in all these different areas. Remember, Virginia through Massachusetts, every state in between. Every code enforcement officer that you talk to is going to have reservations when you're bringing up a new material to them.
Right.
At the very least, we're able to say, look, man, I know this isn't familiar to you, but this product that I'm using carries a seal of approval that says that it's appropriate for what I'm asking you to do with it, or what I'm asking of it. Mm-hmm. So that has helped dramatically. And we've been working on that with the USHBA behind Jacob Waddell, our president, current executive director, interim executive director, Jacob. We've been working with ASTM to establish a building grade certification for hemp hurd here in the United States, which is very much what the Construire and Chanvre does in France, the French version of the USHBA. But what we did was we sort of translated their requirements in terms of dust content, fiber content, moisture content, overall cleanliness, and packaging, which, believe it or not, is actually a big part of the equation. But we are leaving it a little bit more open to innovation on particle sizing. So there's still a range within which your particle sizing has to land for a building quality hurd.
Okay. But
we're giving people a little bit more leeway here in the United States so that this process and this certification is not tied to any one single piece of equipment or any one cultivar. If you as a precast block or panel person want a different cut or grade of hurd slightly than what I might want for spraying, then that's fine. And we're leaving that open. We're trying to do this in such a way to leave it open so that there's no limit there's no barrier to entry to say that you have to be running a $5 million decorticator. No, you could hit this on a $250,000 decorticator, but there is a standard for the important things, which are dust and fiber content, moisture content, cleanliness, and then packaging. And I mentioned that earlier. If you think with me in your mind of a super sack filled, sitting on a flatbed truck, with 30 other super sacks rumbling down the highway hundreds of miles, what can happen is if that hurd is not compressed, it can mill itself. Mm. So you might be doing your job in the factory and creating a really nice product, but by the time it gets to me on site, it's degraded and it's dusty, and I do very much dislike the fact that every 40 pounds of this material is wrapped in plastic. Don't get me wrong. I hate that, but it's a necessary evil because it's the only way to make sure that the quality that you're producing in the factory is delivered on site. And again, for us, spray application, I'm going to be more picky about that than most people. We're not doing this in such a way to make it so that we're the only source for it. That certification is going to be made so that anyone can apply for it. It doesn't have to be tied to a cultivar or a piece of equipment. You have a little bit of leeway in your sizing, distribution of particles. So we're really trying to do this in such a way that it's not going to be a barrier or a limit, for people getting into it. So to answer your question, we're looking very intently at who and how and when we're going to be able to get our herd domestically.
Okay.
It's definitely a priority. The priority for this year is getting the equipment out and getting people trained in preparation for the coming IRC index that we just wrote for Hempcrete Building.
Oh, how can people get trained on this? Like, what is there a plan to train more people?
Yes, there is, and that's the other part of our announcement here. We're going to be doing a proper 4-day technician training specifically for working with this equipment. The first of which is going to be the first weekend in April, April 2nd through the 5th.
Okay.
Here in Pennsylvania at Wild Fox Farm, where my warehouse is, in Bartow, PA. And we're really excited. This actually is a recent development, breaking news specifically for the podcast here. Damien and his wife Celine will be attending that first workshop, which is monumental for me in a lot of ways that it might not be for other people, other than obviously having the master at hand and the guy who designed the spray system to be there for our first training. So it'll be 4 days long, and we're going to cover, obviously, setting up, operating the equipment, site organization and safety. And then we're actually going to delve into a couple of things that, kind of take it above and beyond a normal workshop. We are not doing this as a franchise, although people who buy this equipment are essentially going to be in almost a franchise-like relationship with me. I can't guarantee you work. This is a small industry. You'll be helping me to build the brand here in the United States. But in order for you to be successful the way that I've been, I'm going to share more with you than just how to actually spray. That's one part of it. I can teach you how to spray. You can be really good at that. But if you're not good at things like estimating and bidding, basic accounting, taxes, things like that, how do I charge if I'm doing work out of state? Who do I owe tax to? There's a lot of things, shipping and receiving. The black hole that has become shipping and receiving alone is something that if I don't feel like if I don't share that with people who take this workshop and this training, you might have the money to buy the equipment. You might have a few projects lined up, but how do you take it to the next level? And how do you become an actual business? How do you really do this? So to me, that's critical. And I think it's something that, again, there's been a lot of great education and workshops done around hempcrete. But they're mostly focused on celebrating the material, basic information on how to work with it. But nobody's really pulled it together yet in terms of, how do I actually make money doing this? How do I actually become successful doing this? And that's critical. And I want to make sure, again, this is not a cheap, 1-day hempcrete workshop. And I don't mean cheap in terms of quality of education. I mean, dollar amount. This is a real training, the cost of which will actually get put towards your equipment. So if you take the training with us, the cost of that training is built into the equipment. So if you do decide to buy it, the cost of the training comes off of the list price of the equipment.
Oh, wow. That's
so
cool.
in a certain way, I'm making it compulsory that you come and take the training. It's up to you. I'll be on the phone with you if you don't take the training. I might have to come to your project if you don't take the training. So either way, that cost is covered, but I really want to encourage people to take this training. Now, we're going to be doing at least 2 here in Pennsylvania. The first one, the dates are hard. Again, April 2nd through the 5th. We'll have links and everything for everybody to get more information on that and sign up.
Okay.
But then we're going to be doing a few more, one of which for sure will be in Oregon sometime in the summer. We're thinking about 2nd or 3rd week of June. Another in Austin, Texas, sometime in November, because they have a little bit longer of a season.
Sure.
We can do work down there a bit later. And then possibly another one on the West Coast, maybe somewhere like LA.
Cool.
So there'll be a handful of these trainings. I want to make sure that people don't have to travel all the way across the country to come and take what I'm making to be a compulsory training. But it is important. I really want people to take it. if they're keen and interested in running the equipment, there's no risk. You can come and take the class. If you decide to buy the equipment, obviously the price comes off of that. But I really want people to take the training because I want to do as best as possible a good job of preparing people to be as successful as we have been.
Right.
And that's a relative term. Don't get me wrong. We're not making millions of dollars yet. But the potential is there when you have things like the code pending, the residential code is pending. People are getting domestic supplies online for hurd and stuff like that. We're doing what we can to make the equipment domestic and easy to get and more accessible. So, all of those things are great. But if you don't learn how to run a business, how do I estimate a job? What happens at the end of the month? I did a job in Vermont, but I'm in Pennsylvania. How do I pay tax on that? Do I have to pay tax on that? Do I have to charge tax on that? So there's a lot of things that we've learned the hard way over the last 4 years that I'd really like to boil down into a 4-day long class that covers more than just running the equipment, which is important.
Sure.
There'll be plenty of that. Everybody will have an opportunity to spray their own wall section. We're actually, this is another portion of the training announcement. We're going to be partnering with Matt Marino from Homeland Hemp Co. in North Dakota. He's just come up with and designed a precast wall panel section for Hempcrete. So our first workshop, at least, we may do it for the other ones as well, but for our first workshop, Matt's going to be there and we're actually going to spray Matt's wall sections. Wow. So instead of having people spray a wall section that, as soon as they leave, I'm going to knock the hemp out of and use the next time, we're going to actually spray these pre-panelized wall sections that I can then store in the warehouse. And that could be used later. Sure. So it's kind of a fun, you'll be getting a taste of a lot of different things, but, this is another reason why we bought the spray application equipment actually is because if you're going to set up to do a precast panel facility, doing it by hand is not the way to go. So we think that spraying with precast panels is actually a good union. So, but again, back to Damien, short story, and you might have heard it before, but in March of 2020, I had signed up, bought flights, paid for hotels to go to NOCO for a week. And then straight from NOCO, literally the day I got home from NOCO, I was to fly to York in the UK to attend the International Hempcrete Builders Summit, where Damien and several other spray application systems were going to be demonstrated. Of course, the entire world shut down in between then. Right. And then at the end of that trip to York in the UK, I was actually going to travel back to France with Damien through the Channel to his place to train with him, and I never got to do that. So this is amazing for me. I mean, all of the work that we did in the time in between now and then, all through COVID, all of the work that we were fortunate and lucky enough to have done, we did all on our own, and we had to learn the hard way. So I'm as excited as everybody else should be that Damien is coming to this.
That's great.
Because I'll actually get to spend time with him, and you'll have the benefit of both what I've learned and also what Damien can add to that. So
cool. That sounds like an amazing event.
Yeah, really exciting.
Yeah, and we'll put the links up to that on the show page for this episode. But that you're so committed to the success of the individuals who want to get into this and the success of the industry in general speaks sort of volumes about your own character, and also sort of like the attitude in the hemp space right now. It's like people want to help other people succeed. And
right.
I like seeing that, and we want to see more of it. So thank you, Cameron.
Yeah, from the beginning, man. I mean, it's difficult, and you can say this is because there isn't anything to compete over. But we have been very fortunate to have worked with our colleagues around the country. Countless different times where we've joined together with a colleague in this industry to get something done, egos aside. And it's been fantastic. And I think that that's the spirit that will really carry us forward. And it's not, it's as self-serving as it is, for a higher good, mm-hmm. right? It's the right way to do it. And I encourage other people to do that. Join together with the people in your area that are interested in hemp and hemp building and all of those things. And you'll go a lot further at this point together than you will alone. So,
amen to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Cameron McIntosh, it's great to talk to you again today. And thanks for sharing this exciting news with us about the new Americanized version of the Ereasy Spray-Applied Hempcrete System and the upcoming trainings. I think people are going to be pretty excited about this. So thank you.
Yeah, really, really excited to see everybody. We've had a lot of interest previous to this, and we're expecting some folks to be reaching out after the announcement as well. But yeah, again, check out the links. There'll be multiple opportunities throughout the year, depending on what part of the country you're in, to take this training course and to get your hands on the equipment. So yeah, cheers, Eric. Thanks for the time, man.
Yeah, and I'll try to get up to the training in April and shoot some video, and we can share some of that with the folks out there.
Yeah, awesome. Sounds good, man.
That's Cameron McIntosh from Americhanvre Hemp and the U.S. Hemp Building Association. Again, check out lancasterfarming.com for all the relevant links. And I really appreciate you listening to our show today, sticking around to the very end. Sort of a longer show today, but that's all right. We've got no space and time constraints, right? Anyway, my name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Don't take my word for it. Pick yourself up a copy and see for yourself. And remember, if you ever want to get in touch with me, I'm just an email away. Send it to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. Or if you don't do the email, you can call me up and leave me a message, 717-721-4462. All right, well, thanks again. Until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
Season 2, Episode 3 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2022 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by me, yours truly, Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.